I want to welcome each and every one of you to the session today. This is a very special session on corporate IVF. Just a quick housekeeping reminder. We want to have lots of discussions, so we need your questions, but please use the Q&A function on the screen that you see and not chat. If you want to say hi to somebody, great, do it through chat, but questions and answers are going to be pulled off of the Q&A function. Please use that. Additionally, just want to remind you that you can see as many of the former sessions as you want by going to ivfmeeting.com, the i3 website. They are recorded and available to you. We also want to remind you that the speakers today have extended biographies on that website if you want to learn more about each and every one of our attendees today. Well, I just want to say hello from sunny South Texas. My name is Rusty Poole. I'm an embryologist in San Antonio, and I'm really pleased to be with you today to talk about this fascinating subject. The amalgamation of IVF centers and the production of these networks, I think, is happening worldwide. It's on, I think, everyone's mind, and we want to really kind of pay attention today to how these processes are going to influence the embryology laboratory and the role of the embryologist. Interestingly enough, there have been a couple of articles of late that have all arrived at the same dollar figure, but the estimate is that by 2026, the IVF market is going to be worth $36.2 billion with an estimated compound annual growth rate of 10.2%. So we are attracting a lot of attention and looks like we'll continue to do so in terms of new business arrangements. And we have an opportunity today for us to all learn about those business arrangements in these networks, how they form, and what it means to each and every one of us working in the IVF laboratory. So I also want to tell you that we've added a panelist, and I am very pleased to introduce Richard Banks. Richard is the the group chief strategy officer and managing director of Virtus Health, and he has significant experience in the industry working with executive teams and healthcare organizations of varied kind. He's played a vital role in the expansion of Virtus into the European market and shaping their global strategy. He holds a master's degree, healthcare management and leadership. He's worked as an NHS director, management consultant, and a private hospital director, so he brings plenty of expertise to the table. Thank you for joining us today, Richard, and we look forward to hearing your thoughts as we move along.
Thank you, Rusty. It's a pleasure to be here.
It is indeed my pleasure to reintroduce to you my colleague and co-moderator, Professor Behr. He's one of my oldest friends in IVF. He is exceedingly well published. He has worked worldwide in the IVF setting. He has been a leader in our field. He has chaired the College of Reproductive Biology, the American Association of Bioanalysts. He was the first non-physician leader of the Pacific Coast Reproductive Society. And again, he has traveled internationally and worked and is really well versed in the entire idea of interactions and different business models of IVF. So Barry, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Rusty. It's indeed an honor to be part of this esteemed group to talk about a very in vogue topic, as Rusty mentioned. It's extremely timely, as many of these I3 symposia are. And it's especially an honor to co-moderate this with Rusty, who really needs no introduction. You know, all the things and the accolades he said about me, he essentially made possible by being my mentor, one of the major mentors in my life, professionally and personally. I mean, he's an incredible individual as well as an amazing scientist. He's had a very long career, quite diverse in how he entered into IVF, which we're not going to talk about here, but he's been in IVF for 34 years, almost as long as I've been alive, although not quite, Rusty, but he's certainly, he's an icon in the field. He's a thought leader. He's done his publications in science as well as his roles in boards, and serves on actually several boards, including the Pacific Coast Reproductive Society, serves on editorial boards for professional journals that we all respect and admire. And I can't tell you how much of an honor it is to be moderating this or co-moderating this with Rusty. So hopefully we'll be interacting more about the topic when we get later on in the program. But I think we should get started now with our first speaker. who is also very well known in the field. And it's my honor to introduce TJ Farnsworth. Mr. Farnsworth is with a company called Inception Fertility. And Inception Fertility is also supporting this webinar, so please recognize them for this tremendous support. Mr. Farnsworth is considered, I think, best as a serial entrepreneur. He has had many, many achievements in the areas of patient care, patient experience, as well as the general field of reproductive endocrinology and infertility. His impact has had the opportunity to reshape the industry and improve the patient experience, as I mentioned, and launched this company Inception in 2014. He's changing the landscape in the USA, so please read more about him on our website. But for now, I'd like to welcome him to speak about corporate IVF. TJ, take it away.
Thank you, Barry, and I appreciate the rest of the panelists. I am very excited to have an opportunity to talk to all of the attendees today, have a chance to talk about what's happening within the industry, what's changing, the consolidation that's happening across the landscape here in North America, as well as have an opportunity to talk about Inception, introduce us as a company, and hopefully give the attendees some things to think about in terms of the ways in which we can collectively work together to advance the goals of us as a specialty. So, but first of all, I'd like to, as the corporate representative of IVF on this panel, I thought I would just first introduce us as a company, Inception as a business, understanding that we're a player in that environment. And we're representative of it. And it's hard for me to think of us as a sort of corporate provider, although I know that that's an appropriate description because we do have a corporate entity involved rather than just being a physician practice. But for me, it's a little more personal than that. And that sort of goes to the founding of us as a company and the history of Inception as a business. As Barry mentioned, I am a serial entrepreneur. This is my second from scratch healthcare business. I started a company back in 2005 that became one of the largest platforms for radiation oncology services in the United States. I built that company very rapidly from my kitchen table to 14 major US markets across the country. And doing that was focused on my career and really put that in front of the family building aspect of things. And as the universe tends to do, I, not long after starting the company, met a woman that would become my wife, and she went along that journey with me of growing that business, and we put off our family building goals, like a lot of the patients that come into our clinics all the time these days. And we got married in 2011, so 6 years after we met, and we without revealing my wife's age, I'll just say we didn't meet in our mid-20s, so we were solidly in the appropriate age range for patients within our clinics. And we're both in healthcare, but we had never considered the idea that we would have trouble starting our family. We were both really interested in having families. I'm the kind of guy who grew up saying to myself, I wanted 12 babies, and my mother would say, you really need to meet the woman before you decide it needs to be 12. And so we wanted to start our family immediately. We actually got pregnant on our own on our honeymoon, and went in for an 8-week ultrasound. I could tell by the look on our friend of mine who's an OB-GYN face that this was not a great outcome, and that was the first pregnancy loss that we experienced, and that set us down a journey of 2.5 years of infertility. We did 6 IUIs, ended up doing 3 rounds of IVF. We had 3 pregnancy losses in total, but ultimately ended up at the end of it all with a very cute little boy who was born in March of 2014. That was very lucky to look like his mother. He doesn't look like this anymore. He's now a rambunctious 7.5-year-old, I guess soon to be 8-year-old boy. And Margaret's my wife. Margaret and I had the outcome that we all would want for all of our patients. We wouldn't change anything about the way we did things because we want this same little baby boy. But there was aspects to the journey that we felt were missing. There was a lot of focus during our treatment on outcome data. A lot of interest in we felt like we were a number in a lot of ways, and a lot of times we felt like we were at a badly run doctor's office, which My wife and I both being in healthcare, like I mentioned, that's more of the rule than the exception. So we felt patient with it. We had a lot of confidence in our physician, the clinical and lab staff that we had a chance to meet. We really loved them, although we had a lot of difficulty in the way in which we interacted with the clinic on the whole. And I became interested in the industry. And so as I was out visiting fertility, visiting my cancer centers all across the United States, I would walk into fertility clinics all across the country, and I started to realize what I felt like was an opportunity, which was to build a business that was focused on the idea that the journey matters just as much as the destination. Now, obviously, the destination matters a lot. A great outcome is important to a great patient journey. But I felt like there was really something missing here. And I was in a medical specialty, oncology, that already realized that, or had long ago realized that really the emotional aspect of things matters a lot in a patient's journey. And so later in 2014, I left my last company and started Inception with the idea of building a family of companies that were focused on the patient journey and experience as sort of a central guiding light. And just so I don't totally sit here and focus entirely on my son, when he gives you a chance to see the rest of my family, he has a little sister, 17 months his junior, that's the product of spontaneous conception, as tends to be sometimes with patients in our situation. But back to my story. We ended up launching Inception in the end of 2014, and really over the course of the past several years, it's grown into this family of brands. Many of these brands are ones which the attendees today probably are familiar with. However, it's all anchored by what we refer to as the Prelude Network, which is our network of fertility clinics. We have 75 clinics across 23 MSAs across North America. All of which maintain their own brands. So we believe very strongly that the local brands within the markets have a ton of equity, and we want them to maintain their autonomy. But the common thread amongst all of our clinics that are part of the Prelude Network and all of the brands is this obsessive focus on patient experience. And but getting away from just talking about Inception, I wanted to focus a little bit on the industry as a whole. And I know there'll be a lot of questions that we'll get a chance to address during the Q&A, but I know that there's a lot of anxiety and focus on the idea of consolidation within the industry. And so this slide is part of a larger data deck, but it really highlights what we see as consolidation within the industry. So right now you see the 8.2% across the bottom. That is Inception and its representation amongst all of the number of cycles being performed across North America. And you'll notice that 57% of the cycles being performed are being performed in fragmented practices, practices that remain not a part of any one of these consolidated platforms. The rest of these percentages within these sort of between the 57 and 8.2 are the other platforms that I'm sure you're all familiar with. These are platforms that are part of large conglomerates like Eugen and Boston IVF or CCRM, or platforms that have financial partners like Inception does, ones like US Fertility and Ovation, and some of the newer ones, IV, and a few of the others. So without pointing out which one is which, you can still see that there's a considerable amount of fragmentation, even though there are growing consolidation amongst these platforms. And each one of these platforms are trying to fulfill different niches. They are finding partners within the industry that meet the goals of their platform. And really, in my opinion, there's a platform probably to fit the goals of each individual clinic. Not one is right or wrong. Not one is better or worse. They're just different. And I think this is going to continue to happen because the changes and challenges that we see as an industry are going to continue. And whether that's continuing experiences, challenges like regions across the country have seen, and we're going to continue to see with extreme weather events, that the power of a network really has an opportunity to benefit. In Texas, where Inception is headquartered and has a very large footprint amongst every major city in the state. When we had a hurricane 5 or 6 years ago that majorly impacted Houston, we were able to move patients to other clinics within the state. We had an incident in New Orleans last year where a hurricane hit the city and knocked the clinic without power. We were able to move staff diesel fuel for generators amongst clinics within the region that really had the ability to support each other. And then obviously, as we were all impacted in this whole platform of discussion started from, which was the COVID pandemic, and there's really the power of network working together. I do firmly believe that there will always be a place for fragmented practices within the industry. Not every practice is right for being part of one of these consolidated networks, but there really is power and benefit for being part of a network if you choose the right network that fits with your cultural goals, what's right for the personality of your practice, and and if you choose that being part of a network is right for you. And I think that, like I said, you think these consolidations are going to continue, and I think part of the reason for that is penetration and utilization is increasing, and I think it's going to continue to increase. I know we've got a lot of attendees here today from markets across the world, but if you look at the United States, as it compares to some of its peers, there's a lack of penetration within the space, and so we're going to continue to see utilization within our industry increase. I think that Rusty mentioned it earlier. This is the idea of 10+% compound annual growth rate within any space within healthcare is absolutely crazy. And you're seeing that because there's been a pent-up demand that happened. And I think we're going to continue to see that. This following slide, and I'll ask you not to focus too much on the dollar numbers because they're not my numbers, but the cycle count numbers are accurate. And I would say that you can see the United States as it compares from its non-mandated markets to its mandated markets, as it compares to more penetrated and more mature fertility markets around the world in terms of utilization. That change is going to continue to happen. The cat's out of the bag when it comes to employer-sponsored fertility benefits or mandated fertility coverage. I think we're going to continue to see this change, and it's like I said. I think that we as a specialty are going to have to figure out how to meet the needs of that demand, and how do we do that? I think we have to consider innovative provider models. We have to consider technology and automation. We have to look at ways in which we can create efficiencies in the way we operate. And I think that, as much as anything, I think this is probably most important, and one of the things that we, as part of this community, need to work on together, which is, focusing on how we can attract the best and brightest talent in our field. We have an aging talent pool, and we have a growing need for the two things that really are restrictors to our ability to meet the demands for the space, and that is physicians and embryologists. Within our network of clinics, those are the two things that we are constantly recruiting for and constantly doing everything we can to try and attract appropriate talent. But we as an industry need to be thinking about how do we attract people to the space, because we are either going to need to figure out a way to meet the demand that exists and that is going to continue to grow, or we're going to end up with clinics that end up operating out of network, that end up increasing the cost for clinics and decreasing access. And access to care is something I think is probably important to all of us. Certainly it's important to us. And I think we need to think about, rather than me just saying, hey, I think we need to think about, how do we attract people, and how do we attract people to our industry? How do we make this attractive for people thinking about their career path? I think what I wanted to do is give us some action items, give us some things to think about. I think all of us on this call have an opportunity to have an impact here, whether it's our relationship with our coworkers, our managers, or our employees. How do we create an industry that is attractive for the next generation, for a new generation that can come in and help us meet the needs of this demand? And part of this is the idea that we, as operators, will have to say to ourselves that we need to be serving our employees first. There's a great business book for those of you who like reading, business books. I'll make a recommendation of one. It's called Patients Come Second. And it's this great idea that I think has got to be important and part of the culture of us as an industry, not just Inception as a company or any of its peers, but all of our clinics across the country, across the world, need to be thinking about how do we put our employees first, because they're going to make it obvious to those around them that this is an industry that people want to enter. And then while at the same time, happy people make happy patients. And so they will inherently improve the patient experience by being happy to be a part of what it is we're doing, which, you know, the mission of what we do as an industry is something that's very easy to get behind, but we've got to create a culture of one which makes people want to be part of it. And how do you do that? I think first is, you know, finding opportunities to drive academic developments in innovations within the organization, within any organization, whether it's, you know, inside your own clinics, whether it's part of a network that you're a part of, or whether it's within the industry. And I think that a lot of you are part of academia, but I don't think you have to be part of academia to contribute this way. Just an example, you know, for what Inception does, we have a lab steering committee that constantly creates opportunities for collaboration amongst all of our lab directors that see themselves as peers, that aren't competing with one another. So it creates an opportunity for innovation across the network. We are constantly looking for opportunities for clinical research collaborations across the network. And I think those are things that all of the consolidators can be doing, as well as fragmented clinics can be doing, to create opportunities for scientists to be doing what they love to do, which is being a scientist. I think that we also have to look at the opportunity to create learning and development career paths for everyone within our organizations. I think career development is important for all of our employees' performance and retention, and people entering the industry having a clear pathway for their careers, whether it's schools that they can clearly learn to advance their skills, or within our own clinics, advancing people from andrology to embryology to senior embryology and so forth. And I think, you know, this post-pandemic world has presented a number of opportunities for us to do that. For example, at Inception, we had developed a virtual learning platform by which we can constantly be looking to advance our employees' career opportunities. I think that that's something that probably a lot of the systems are deploying right now. You know, this virtual world that we're in has really presented an opportunity for us to create a lot of opportunity. And then I think, you know, easy, great benefits. We need to make sure that we're, you know, walking the walk and talking the talk in terms of providing family building benefits to our employees, as well as, you know, presenting opportunities from a technology perspective to, you know, to create environments which really ease our team's use of technology to make them more efficient. So those are things that I think that you could be implementing as part of your organization today, so that we can begin to think to ourselves, how do we make this an industry that's more attractive for people to stay in and to want to enter, so we can meet the needs of the demand going forward. So thank you. I know I went a little bit over on time. I apologize. I wanted to try and get to a few things, but I tried to hurry up at the end. But I look forward to some question and answer. I know we're going to try and get to one question now, and then we can do some more towards the end of the panel.
EJ, that was fantastic. Thank you so much for the great but concise overview of the strategy that you've employed. The one thing I'm a little bit curious about, and I'd like to hear your comments on, and that is, when you build a network like Prelude, where do you draw the line between the autonomy of each individual clinic, and then what are the goals of the network? Specifically, I think about the laboratory.
Sure.
Where is decision making made, and how is that controlled in a network?
Yeah, so when it comes to things like lab protocols or ways in which labs are operating, we're not interested in creating you know, standardized protocols across the system. We're interested in creating collaborative opportunities by which all of our lab directors can come together and create best-in-class practices. And we're big believers in data, so we love collecting data and sharing data and doing it in a transparent way. And, you know, ultimately, you know, when it comes to ways in which the different labs operate, our labs all do operate, you know, very much similarly and very much different. But we let the lab steering committee make decisions around how in which they're going to operate independently. We, as a consolidator, as a platform, as a network, we're not interested in running labs. We're running the business aspect of things, and we're presenting and being facilitators, so to speak, for those lab directors to collaborate with one another and make decisions.
Well, just one more quick question. That is, as you brought up the idea of one of the rate limiting things is personnel and embryologists. Where is Prelude currently looking to fill those positions in the laboratory? And would you envision a network developing their own training center?
Yeah, so we've had some conversations internally about developing a Inception University type of a thing. We frankly, for a talented embryologist, I have a spot at every one of our clinics in North America. So should someone be interested, just feel free to send me an email. But I think that really when we're looking to recruit, it's about hiring talent. And if you wait until you need somebody, you'll oftentimes lose the opportunity to snatch that talent where you can. But I think we as a network need to think more about how we could be creating some of those educational opportunities, training opportunities internally. Right now, we have training programs within our individual clinics, but certainly there's been some thought about that, and I think that's a thought and idea that's going to continue to develop.
Thank you very much. And when we get to the question and answer session after the last presentation, I do want to get Richard's take on his view of Europe and the rest of the world and how it's falling in line with what we're seeing in the United States. So I do want to get to the point where we give some time to hear from Richard. Right now, though, it's a pleasure to introduce our next speaker. One of the things that has come about, and that is the potential of running multiple laboratories and having even companies that do just nothing but laboratories. But one of the people that really has got quite a bit of expertise in doing that is Dr. Kathy Miller, and it's a pleasure to introduce Kathy. Kathy has been a laboratory leader in some of the bigger stellar institutions. She's run lots of cycles. She's also run multiple laboratories. She's very well published. She has made presentations worldwide. She's made a real impact. In 2017, she helped to create the Ovatools Training Institute in Fort Lauderdale, and will be firing that academy up to train future leaders. She has mentored some of the better embryologists that are practicing worldwide today. So it is, and again, please, you can go to the website and see her impressive resume along with that of the other speakers. So without any further ado, I want to introduce Kathy, and she's going to talk about directing multiple laboratories. So Kathy.
Thank you for the kind introduction, and thank you for including me in this group today. So just excuse me one moment. So today I'm going to talk about the business of managing multiple ART laboratories. As most of you know, I started out my career as a young embryologist and at an academic institution, and worked my way up into private practices. And I had an opportunity in 1999 to join Dr. Richard Scott to start RMA New Jersey. And it was at RMA New Jersey and working with the great management team they had there, we started thinking about how we could turn running a clinic into a business. That's where I sort of honed my skills. And after a 10-year exciting career there, I decided to go out with some of my executive colleagues to start MedTech for Solutions, to see if we could run a standardized system of laboratory management. So just quickly, I'm the vice president, part owner of MedTech for Solution. I'm also the vice president, chief scientific officer of Innovation Fertility. I sit on the scientific advisory boards of iGenomics, Genomic Prediction, and AIBF, and I'm also on the board with A-Life and a shareholder. So there's many different ways how to manage multiple ART laboratories. At the simplest level in the United States, individual laboratory directors can run up to 5 laboratories at one time. And depending on their style of management, they might continue to manage the laboratory or direct the laboratory as an individualized center, or they might have a consolidated method of practice and laboratory management. At the time I made this slide, there was a distinction between large practices and corporate ownership, but now they're very blurred. So the the two bullets are probably the same now, but at the practice level, large practices like RMA, EVRMA Global, CCRM, and Boston IVF had many laboratories and running them sometimes at individualized levels, most of the time as structured, standardized levels. And again, corporate levels now, we have Ovations, Inception, Innovation Fertility, and US Fertility, who own multiple practices and their laboratories and deal with laboratory management in individualized and also standardized methods. MedTech for Solution, as I said, is a fee-for-service management service organization. Our specialty is running laboratories as a business. So today I would like to take the rest of my time to discuss with you the state of the ART laboratory industry in the United States, the benefits and challenges of corporate management, and my experience of performing structured, standardized lab management as a business. So we're seeing the consolidation of the total ART industry, and the laboratories sort of lagging behind. I think management is more individualized, and we're starting to see the influences of businesses creeping in to manage laboratories. Some of the pluses of having a business, a corporate level management partner, is that the company is able to invest money into operational and technological advances that individual ART practice or laboratory might not be able to financially afford. They can also provide value to the on-site laboratory team by, offering added services, extended personnel, that are necessary in the state of consolidation, this rapid demand for services, staffing shortages, and increased regulatory oversight. Running multiple laboratories at one time gives the company the ability to leverage the strength and volume of multiple laboratories with purchasing, quality assurance, staffing, and forming a network of colleagues. So this slide shows the traditional organizational structure of laboratory management. We have at the top of our pyramid, the laboratory director that runs the laboratory in conjunction with the medical director and clinical consultants. Below the laboratory director is the technical supervisor who assists the director, as well as the general supervisor that supervises the day-to-day running of the lab and the technical staff. I really like this slide. This was a paper by a group of very esteemed American laboratory directors looking at contemporary ART operations. And when I started in IVF, it was very simple. Most of the processes, and I'm sorry, this is a busy slide, took us to day 3 where we did the transfer and froze the rest of the embryos. But today, as you see, we go down, we have all these things. We're taking our embryos out to day 5, day 6, day 7. We're performing biopsy. We're vitrifying individually. We're doing egg freezes, egg thaws, all different types of things. So it's a huge workload. In addition, in the United States, we have tremendous regulatory paperwork and influences. We spend a lot of time preparing for inspections of all types, our regulatory inspections, also state health department inspections, our FDA. We are freezing oocytes, and we have to apply and maintain tissue bank licenses. And of course, we enter our data into a national register. There's all the items of running the lab, quality control, quality assurance. Our equipment has gotten much more complicated. Training new embryologists, we're at a regulatory level required to maintain competencies of our trained embryologists and document that. We need to do in-service training. We also need to have continuing education, and also the administrative part of being able to perform laboratory cycles, chart preparations, consents, communications with our clinical teams, communication with our patients, communication with our lab team, maintenance of inventory and supplies, billing, document control and management. And so I love this slide, and I always acknowledge that I stole it from Art Compass and Dr. Michael Behr at Denver Fertility. Embryologists should focus on making babies capable of resulting in live born babies. And embryologists today are miracle workers. The job that was when I started is totally different from the job today. It's so complex. So when you have a corporate entity managing your laboratories, the local laboratories can focus on what they do best, making embryos. And here's a typical structure of a management service organization. So you see the corporate management. Typically, there's many laboratory directors, especially in the United States, where we're only allowed to direct 5 labs at a time. We also have technical supervisors that can help on a day-to-day basis, giving advice to the local laboratories. We have trainers that can go in and help train. We also have a large quality assurance department that performs quality assurance and improvement. And we also have a per diem staff that can go in and support our local laboratories if they're short. We also have a large operation department that we have administrators, and I will talk a little bit later about what we provide in administration. We have risk management. We help with the regulatory, HR, IT, and as Dr. Poole said, we started a training center many years ago, primarily to train anybody who wanted to come to, and now it's really evolving into more of a corporate training center to support all the laboratories that we manage. We also help with the supply chain with purchasing, equipment contracts, leasing, PM, inventory, lot holds, QC testing. And we participate in a lot of technology because MedTech has a large group of laboratories we manage. So a lot of vendors like to, have us beta test equipment and that. So that's some of the pluses of large laboratories and numbers. The key to success in overcoming challenges when you use a corporate entity to run to your laboratory is the company should have a mission and a culture. So MedTech adopted 2, one on the operational side and one on the technical side. We believe in working smarter, not harder, and we believe in single embryo transfer. So we do run a standardized system. Our labs are standardized. They run 80% the same. It's impossible to make every lab 100% the same. We try to cultivate a network laboratory culture where all our programs talk, share experiences. We invest in technology to improve the running of the business operationally and also in technology. We run this, of course, virtually because we're off-site managers. And at first that was a difficult concept, but today with COVID, everybody's used to virtual something. So virtual management has been more widely accepted. And the key to a business coming in and managing multiple laboratories, especially when they're using a standardized system, is to integrate the system into the laboratories in a stepwise fashion. I say that running multiple laboratories is 10% skill, 20% sheer organization, and then this day, 70% using systems and technology. So I break down how we integrate into laboratories. We manage 2 different types of laboratories: de novo laboratories that we start up through our holding company, or laboratories where the practice comes to us and asks us to manage. So they each have different challenges. So in a running laboratory, we start at level 1. We want to achieve some type of normalcy and predictability in the lab. Many of the lab team wonder why the physicians have a company come into the run the lab. And one of the reasons is many laboratorians, need help finding the fine balance between patient care, staff training, and completing administrative tasks. We try to help by implementing systems that help people prevent errors in the lab and help to have the highest quality outcomes and implement continuous quality improvement. What we find when we come in as a business, most labs are running in survival mode because of all the things they have to do, all the, the technology we have to perform in the lab now, and this a giant rise in volume and that. So they're living by survival, and most people are preparing for an inspection, doing paperwork after the fact. And so we're here to try to implement tools that they can do it real time and balance patient care with the administrative duties of having a laboratory. So the first thing we do on level 1 is we institute process control. So you can see all these bullets about the challenges of process control, and I'm not really going to go into them, but we all know probably the biggest one is having adequate protocols that reflect what's being done in the laboratory, and that all the staff is aware of these protocols and signed off. And one of the major things we do is we take them out of paper and take them virtual. So again, I run a standardized system, so all the laboratories have the same protocols. Updating is discussed amongst the network, but we do have a team of administrators that make all the changes, publish the protocols. We use all electronic signatures and making sure all the staff are signed off, and that procedures are validated when we change protocols or implement new procedures. And so we have invested in a company, a proprietary LIMS system, and one of the modules of the LIMS system is a document control repository that not only has the protocols, but all the documents that are associated with running a laboratory. The other thing about establishing normacy is staffing, and that's really hard to establish now with the shortage of staff. As our other speakers have said today, our industry is seeing significant growth, at least 10% a year. We have a shortage of laboratory staff, and we have a significant graying of our industry and very poor legacy planning in our laboratories. This is a study that was performed by the University of Washington in conjunction with the ASCP, looking at the staffing of clinical labs. And actually in the paper, they say there's 5 generations working in the laboratory right now. But I think the main ones that we see are the baby boomers, and they comprise 40% of the laboratory staff in the ART industry. And in the next 7 years, you're probably going to see most of the baby boomers retire. They also have a very different work ethic than the other generations in the lab. The baby boomers are about achievement, and they feel that achievement is acquired by paying dues. And for that, I think most of us, our baby boomers, can say that we worked all the time. We didn't have weekends off all day long. We didn't have any of the conveniences of ART today, buying media, buying our ICSI needles, EMRs, applications that we can use in the laboratory to look at data, run equipment. And baby boomers made personal sacrifices for their success in this industry, the growth of the industry, and the development of the technology. The next generation in the laboratories comprises of Generation X. They're 20% of the workforce. And their work ethic is based on, how work affects their personal life. And this is a very big change from the baby boomers, who work was their priority and their personal life was secondary. The next generation we see is Generation Y, otherwise known as the millennials. They comprise 35% of our laboratories, and their work ethic is a balance of work life. They want their life to be fun. They want their work to be a fun place, and they're very concerned about that. And that's hard for most of management or baby boomers, where we sacrificed our work-life balance to, create these laboratories and this technology. And the last generation that we're seeing in the lab is Generation Z, and they comprise about 5% of our laboratory staffing. And they are the digital device junkies, and they love technology. And they're really the future of our laboratories. As we've seen in other presentations, the laboratory is probably going to become automated, and they're not fearful of technology or automation. So one of the things we do as a company is do staffing evaluations. We really critically evaluate the practice, their volumes, the technology they use, how they run. Do they run all the time? Do they run in series? And we, look at that on the basis to make sure the laboratory is safe, it's efficient, it's efficacious for the best outcomes. And again, I'm quoting the Alicani paper that really did look at staffing requirements and staffing needs. And also you see the table to the left, which is the SART ASRM recommended staffing. So we do provide metrics to, create an appropriate staffing model for the practices. And that comes with some resistance from the physicians, because that's going to cost money to increase staff, reduce workloads. We also do provide per diem support. We provide it for practices and laboratories as a fee for service, but more now we provide it to support the laboratories we're running through transitions, staffing shortages, times when staff are on maternal or paternal leaves, all different things. So that is one of the benefits of using a corporate management company. The next level we do is we try to establish and meet standards. So we have a very concrete, tangible metrics of performance that we like to see in our laboratories. We base them off the Alpha ESHRE consensus. We used to derive them from our laboratory, and we changed over the year. We evolved to really look at this international data and really see what the expected QC level is. But within the practice, we have benchmarks that we'd like to achieve and work to, and then we have the metrics that we need to achieve to operate the lab and satisfy regulatory requirements. Quality management is something we see as lacking in a lot of the laboratories we take over. The challenges we all face is most time quality management is paper-based. It's more corrective action centric. And again, we're trying to put in prevention. So we're knowing problems, solving problems before they become major problems that might affect our outcomes. They lack application or informatics to simplify and maximize the process. Typically, a lot of people use an Excel worksheet. And the size of the program, may limit the amount of data that you're able to get out of your quality assurance analysis. And so it's nice when you have multiple laboratories that are standardized, you can use the volume of big data to look at maybe problems that are in a small laboratory versus a large laboratory you're using. And a lot of times staff are unsure when performances or results are unacceptable and you need to act. So you'll see in corporate management, the investment into technology to look at data, track data, use your data to provide consistencies and increase outcomes. We at MedTech have an outcome dashboard that allows us to look at our individual laboratories and as the company as a whole. And it's very important that we hold network meetings. We hold meetings between our laboratories as a collegial learning experience. We also discuss troubleshooting issues we're seeing. And also at a laboratory level, the MedTech team regularly meets with the laboratories to discuss management issues. Business intelligence is sort of a buzzword in any company, and business intelligence is very important in laboratory management. We've invested heavily in building a LIMS system that takes our data, analyzes it for us. We're now starting to apply artificial intelligence because we have such a large data set to see if it sees something we humans cannot. So that is, a large investment. It takes a lot of money. In the beginning years, it was a very big investment for MedTech to make, but we knew we needed to make those investments to have that type of technology, intelligence, to look at data, to run labs better, and help give our laboratories better outcomes. We also take it to a granular level. We look at a lot of inter and intra-laboratory comparisons, especially since we run a standardized program. We know that, they cannot be a cookie cutter replicate of each other. So when people ask me how same are the laboratories, they're about 80% the same. And we really try to express to our multiple laboratories that they're not a silo, they're part of this big group. We learn from other laboratory strengths and weaknesses, from everything to technical performance, outcomes, operations, and troubleshooting. And that's the great things is troubleshooting. Many times one lab will see a problem and identify it so we can stop it before it hits our other labs, especially with reagents, medias, different things. We've been able to identify things that would cause a big standardized system like this to crash. As a corporate management company, we really need to deliver value that exceeds expectation. Otherwise, we're just another entity managing the lab, another set of things that the laboratory has to deal with. And so I'm constantly working with my partners and my team to find services that give the laboratory value, helps them operate in a better fashion, more efficient fashion. And we're constantly looking at all these different aspects of running laboratories. We use technology both in non-technical functions and technical functions. And MedTech has invested in a lot of them, but there's also a lot of non-technical laboratory function systems out there today, with the electronic consent signing with Engaged MD, and I'm sure there's other companies, outsourcing cryo storage management, which is a big deal in laboratories and just consumes a lot of time. So Embryo Options is one of those. As I mentioned before, using digital signatures for signing SOPs and other paperwork in the laboratory, witnessing systems, and customized LIMS that aren't proprietary to a management company. There are many, many out there. One of the things is that added value of MedTech and other corporate entities is, the training and proficiency testing, competency evaluations, and continuing education that we provide. And when we take over laboratories to manage them, it's one of their biggest, challenges, that the proficiency testing is really not sufficient for the scope we do. We're required to perform proficiency testing, but that really amounts to doing, a culture assay and grading embryos. And, it's far more than proficiency is, and competency is really biopsy technique, vitrification. So we implement a lot of extended programs to make sure that we're, providing consistent and reproducible results through all the methods and all the tasks that we do in the laboratory. We have also invested in web-based training systems. So, we can train people on our protocols when they first come. We all have had those new employees that stand there looking like a deer in the headlight, asking us tons of questions about what we're doing while we're trying to do it. So the web-based training system, lets them learn what they're going to do. And then they come in, they don't have so many questions, and they understand what they're seeing. We have the corporate training center. We offer on-site and off-site training. We perform a lot of audits. We perform external PT through our network. We host journal clubs, and we also host training sessions with vendors and that. So our staff can see new equipment. Witnessing systems was one of the ones we recently did. New incubators. There's lots of new technology coming into the laboratories. Also, one of the expertise that we have as a corporate entity is infrastructure. So running many, many different labs, we get to see lab layouts and what physical plant designs work, what operations work or don't. We have developed a LIMS-based equipment QC program that is web-based and virtual. So everybody can see how the equipment's working. We can compare it between the centers to maximize operation of our equipment, and also catch where we're not properly performing QC and reacting. As a company, we keep an inventory of backup equipment. Many of you probably who've worked with me at one time can chuckle, where's the extra injectors? Or we also invest in expensive monitoring devices like the iStat. So they travel all around, and a lot of laboratories can't afford a lot of backup equipment or expensive monitoring devices. So that's something as a business we've invested in. The other thing as a corporate business entity is that we are able to, have some leverage and have national account relationships with our vendors. So our small practices are able to take advantage of better pricing due to the size of our network. We actually see quicker response times by our vendors because we are a national account. We've also invested in lot holds, and our network shares QC testing, and we keep up backup supplies. So when our laboratories run out of something, and we all saw that with COVID shortages, we're able to be in the same lot, share supplies, and help each other out. And the last level is, once we are smoothly operating on level 1, 2, and 3, we start benchmarking to achieve best-in-class results. And it's very important this day and age to be best in class, especially with insurance payers like Optum, Blue Cross Centers of Excellence. They want the highest technology, the best outcomes, the lowest multiple rates. And so as a network, we work together to try to achieve this. We also capitalize on our multiple labs. And I think there's a lot to be said about extern visits, learning from small labs, how they operate efficiently. Large labs, we send our staff who are large labs with a lot of staff to our smaller programs that run in series but have the same volume so they can learn to be more efficient. As a company, we're always involved in strategic planning, not only how to operate laboratories, but how to implement technology. And these laboratories benefit from strategic planning that they probably would not be doing otherwise. We're heavily involved with our vendors and technology, implementing technology, providing beta testing sites, and lastly, big data. We live off as a company big data. Big data drives the future, not only for quality improvement, but implementation of technology. And as we all know, that's just steps away from our door. MedTech is heavily invested in artificial intelligence with embryo selection, looking at our data, not only from embryo selection, pregnancy outcomes, but also seeing artificial intelligence, finding things that we otherwise can't see. And we're also invested in future automation of the laboratory and working with our vendor partners to drive that technology. And while many embryologists are worried that automation is going to make them lose their job, I think with the current shortage of embryologists and the disappearance of the baby boomers from our work staff, that we're going to need automation to keep up with the industry, to provide the volume of care that's needed with this growth, and to provide the best outcomes. But there are challenges managing multiple laboratories, and the biggest one is to secure buy-in. I always say I need 100% for the physician. It was actually their idea to bring our company in to manage their labs, but what happens is that it is complicated to introduce a corporate management system, and while we have finessed it so we don't implode the laboratory implementing all these systems in, things are difficult. And I equate it with you're sort of renovating your house while you're living in it. So the physicians have to support the corporate management. I only request a 50% investment buy-in from the laboratory team that we're taking over. Change is personal for most people. And their first question is really, how will this affect me? Will it change my career path, having a business running the lab? Am I going to have different teammates? Are you going to hire more people? Are you going to have less people? Who do they report to? What is their role? Because we're taking away some of the functions that embryologists perform. And are they going to need to prove themselves to MedTech? We have to build trust, and that's how buy-in comes in. And we have to, deliver the deliverables. We have to give the support we say we're going to give. We're going to have to implement the efficiencies we say we have in our business model, the quality outcomes that we are going to help them achieve. And we have to be there, dependable, always accessible. And of course, the buy-ins are more difficult when the laboratory is underperforming. Unfortunately, I rarely take over a good lab. They don't need us. So most of our laboratory managements are underperforming labs or labs that are struggling, but we take them to a very high operating laboratory. And more often than not, they stay within the company and let us operate the lab because they see the value of corporate operation. Immersion into our system takes time. We set expectations. We also say that the plan has to be, flexible, change. It has to evolve to conquer the challenges of transition. And we find new challenges and opportunities. So every lab is different, and every implementation is different. And again, like I said, it will be remodeling your house while you're living in it. And hopefully we can get the systems implemented and things working efficiently in a quick amount of time. And of course, communication is the biggest challenge. Before COVID, virtual management was a little bit of a challenge, not being on site. But as in everything we do, how we communicate, how we document, and it will make our management program work or not work. So in summary, having a corporate entity manage your lab requires buy-in from your physicians, your laboratory staff, and also the practice management, because most of the time they're used to on-site management. So it's also different for the practice director, the financial director, to try to communicate with us because we're not there. But I do believe corporate management can cultivate a network culture that leaves the lab staff more engaged. They feel like they're a bigger part of a picture. They have better interactions with colleagues, more colleagues that are involved in more things. Business investment in technology to streamline and automate technical and non-technical functions will keep corporate management something that's viable and that practices want to do. Big data will also be valuable and an asset, and reasons why practices will want to use corporate management. And virtual technology, we're all learning that it's pretty good at overcoming geographical roadblocks of not being on site and providing efficiencies that that don't take away from being on site. So at that, I'd like to thank everybody for their time and attention, and we'll stop sharing.
Thank you very much, Kathy, for extremely good presentation that raises a lot of points that I can see many questions already accumulating for the Q&A period. So before I ask you a question, I want to remind everyone that we do have TJ Farnsworth and Richard Banks and Kathy Miller, as well as your two moderators, available to answer questions and moderate the questions after we watch a brief video entitled The Supply and Demand, Life of the Per Diem Embryologist. Enjoy the video, and we'll be with you for Q&A after this.
I work several weeks away from home. I sometimes work locally, but usually my assignments that I accept are 2 to 3 weeks at a time.
What made me become the per diem? So I worked in the field for many years full time. When COVID hit, I was doing some consulting work and also doing embryology. And at that time, the clinic that I was working for paused. And with the startup, there seemed to be a lot of practices that were looking for help. And I got some phone calls and people that reached out to me. And that's what really started that transition for me, because I was not currently committed to anyone during the time of the lockdown. I saw that as an opportunity, and being an embryologist for many years, I know what it's like to work understaffed. So in a way, it was just kind of also a way to give back.
I decided to go per diem once my son graduated high school and I didn't have the requirements at home. I had been working in a small clinic that I spent 24/7 basically on call, or weekends, holidays. I was the only embryologist who did biopsy in the clinic. So I needed to get a little better handle on my schedule.
Many years ago, I started doing my own locum or per diem company, and it was a lot of work doing my own booking and screening of clients, interviewing, invoicing. I started the per diem originally because I saw a huge need. There was such a shortage of embryologists at the time, and there wasn't really an education system in the United States that was turning out trained embryologists. And then as I switched positions again to a batching center, I saw again a need, and my kids were older, so I had some more flexibility, and then started doing a full-time position that was batching, as well as traveling all over the United States as a per diem embryologist. And I did that for about 3.5 years. And then just recently took a full-time position in Minneapolis, and am no longer doing locum embryology.
The reason I became a per diem embryologist was my circumstances changed professionally, and just decided to go on my own and provide the services based on the experience that I have acquired over 20 years.
I became a locum by basically just putting an advert out on ivf.net. I had recently left my job because I wanted to become a graphic designer and embryologist. And I just put an advert out and waited to see if anybody got in touch.
I bring an extra level of experience in terms of visiting so many laboratories and seeing so many different scenarios and equipment and personnel and clinic culture, and that people are always asking me about. So how are things out there? What other things people are doing? And this is when I come in and provide whatever experience I had within their needs.
Well, I always thought that was the case, that you did have to be more senior to be a locum. But actually, because I wanted to explore sort of having two careers, I decided what better time to do it than now, when actually I don't have any other sort of commitments or sort of kids or anything like that, that I don't have any other responsibilities.
Comparing the two types of positions, meaning locum versus a full-time position, some of the positive aspects of being a locum are you don't have that day-to-day challenge of coworkers, management, budgets, and inventory. Some of those things, you're just going in and doing the embryology, even on a management level as a really experienced person, because at some point in your career, if you've been doing it 20 years, like I have, a lot of your day-to-day becomes management of people and problems and less about the embryology.
Something new, and it requires a lot of flexibility and ability to adapt quickly. I have to learn protocols.
In many scenarios, if you're doing per diem and working alongside another embryologist, you get some guidance or kind of an introduction to the way that that particular clinic does things. But oftentimes, if you're covering or doing something and you're working on your own, you kind of get just thrown into the fire, basically.
You just get thrown into the deep end.
Walking into a lab, not knowing pretty much where everything is.
Sometimes you're going in an emergent situation or as a replacement for somebody who is ill, and there isn't a handoff.
I don't know if you want to call it risk. The risk is very different. You need to make sure that wherever you're working, that you are covered appropriately for the worst case scenario. Something like that technically could happen to anyone, per diem versus employee. But you definitely want to take the appropriate steps.
As far as insurance coverage, I personally write into my contract. I do carry a insurance policy to indemnify myself. However, I also write into the contract that because I'm working under the practice direction, that I am covered as basically like an employee is of the clinic.
Other considerations that I would say is you have to be really good at running a small business unless you work for a per diem or local business.
I think the situation right now, at least in the United States, is the lack of embryology, the lack of embryologists. I receive numbers of requests on a weekly basis of needs all around the United States. And I really don't understand the reason for it, but there's definitely a need for embryology, an embryologist.
Sometimes it's just to spell the staff so people can get a vacation, take days off, have maternity leave. Sometimes it's to be able to troubleshoot and tell a doctor that, yes, you need more staff here. You're not running at at an adequate level.
I'm very in demand, which is fantastic. But of course, there is peaks and troughs. So currently, I've been very lucky that I've always been able to find work when I've needed it. But of course, I'm sure there will be a time when actually people won't need a locum in the same way.
Remember, a lot of times when you're coming in as a per diem or locum, it's not a good situation because they aren't able to recruit or retain staff, and they're having to choose a very expensive alternative.
As much as there are quite a lot of trainee embryologists out looking for jobs, unfortunately, where clinics are really struggling is to find staff that are fully qualified, state registered, for example, or ICSI trained. And there is a real shortage at the moment, especially in the UK.
Just a need for a plug and play type of situation instead of having to spend the time training and developing within the laboratory.
A lot of the work I've done, for example, has been covering sort of summer holidays. So actually, it's just giving your staff the opportunity to have time off, and they've got an extra pair of hands in over the summer to allow the staff to take the holidays when they want, and give them a bit more flexibility. But if, for example, you are actually just short-staffed, yeah, I mean, having a locum is probably quite an expensive way to fill that gap.
My relationship with the staff, I think I was very fortunate. It was good. It was amicable.
Really, really well, really nicely, actually. I've always sort of been very welcomed into all of the labs that I've worked in so far. Yeah, they're because you're coming in at a time of need, they're very thankful, they're very appreciative.
I've worked at some very amazing and gracious practices.
So it was kind of a no-win situation. You couldn't be too great and make them all look bad. You couldn't not do well either.
I'm very lab focused and lab based. But I have been doing sort of helping out with storage audits and other types of audits, and also doing a few sort of embryo expiries and things like that.
If that extra set of hands is needed to take out the garbage, then you take out the garbage and you do it gladly, because that is just one thing that somebody else doesn't have to do.
And at the end of the day, yes, we might get better pay than embryologists out there, but like I said, it's also the lack of not having a consistent job, and two is that we do carry with expenses that we take care of that companies or clinics take care, for their employees, and that is something that people don't get to see.
It also is great money if you do it well and protect yourself.
Bottom line is, if you're not working, you're not getting paid.
But there are other trade-offs as well. Sometimes with the per diem work, you have to travel, you have to be away from your family, you have to, rearrange other aspects of your personal life so that you can be committed to this job. And then based on the arrangement that you have with a clinic, with the per diem, there's not really an option if something comes up in your life and you can't do it. So in other words, the commitment is still the same. At least to me it was. If I knew that I was working somewhere, I knew that for that job, I had to be committed. I had to make sure that the flights were, in order, that, I had travel arrangements. So it's a different kind of trade-off. It's not like driving 10 minutes to your daily job, or if your child is sick or something happens and you have a regular job, you might have sick days, or you might have, vacation time. You can plan things like that. So it's really just a different type of planning that's required.
Would I go back, would I be tempted to go back into a regular job in being at home instead of being on the road all the time? yes, at some point I will consider it. This life, obviously, being on the road all the time is not an easy life, you know. On a personal basis, it's a very solitary life. You just you're working and then you're in a hotel, and almost every night I'm just eating by myself and not talking to anybody, and that is not an easy thing to do day after day for weeks and months at a time.
We have a huge growth in this industry. There's a lot of clinics that are continuing to be built. There's a lot of expansion of either corporate clinics as well as REIs who still want to keep their individual smaller clinics. Recruiting to fill the positions, we're already short-staffed. So even to fill the positions that are available now, we don't have the personnel. I think that there needs to be a little more awareness spread into the schools. Embryology is such a small field as far as the jobs available that it's not a very well known field. It's not a publicly known field. And I think that to recruit students into this field and the next generation of embryologists into this field, we need to make it a more public field. We obviously have a population that is aging out of the work. And this is a job that requires a lot of hand-eye coordination, physical skills that as you age, there are limitations. And hopefully you can continue to do it for a long time.
I think the main difference per diem wise was I was really able to give my 100 or 150% while I was there and present. But when the job was done, it was done.
Well, that was great. And I would say that over the course of today's webinar, if we look at the questions and answers, I see the biggest global concern is over the lack of embryologists and staffing of the future. And certainly these per diems can save you if you're careful in how you apply them. One thing I want to do before we get started is just to remind everyone that we've had support today from Inception Fertility for TJ's presentation and MedTech for Solutions for Kathy's presentation. I was remiss in my introduction of Kathy in not touting her role in the formation of MedTech for Solutions, but fortunately she reviewed what she did in there. So I apologize for that, Kathy. But again, thank to both of these entities for your support and a big tip of the I3 hat. One thing before we get going, I would like to bring in Richard and get your perspective, Richard, on the things that we've discussed today. Do you see this as global issues that are facing network development in the field?
Thanks, Rusty. Yeah, I think there are a lot of themes in there that are very, very relevant outside of the US as well. And I was writing down sort of the key points, the pickups really from both presentations, and I start with TJ. He talks about corporatization, local brands being really important, and that is, I agree with him 100% on that. On local branding, I think in the IVF sector, the way it's grown, which is normally clinicians founding their own clinics, right? They grew up as part of a regional or local identity, and that's something that we at Vertus, and we've got clinics in Australia, UK, Denmark, Ireland, and Singapore, tend to prefer working with a local brand rather than trying to layer on an overarching brand, and that's extremely powerful. I think that's really important for the clinic identity as well, and for the local teams on the ground. They have a strong affiliation with that. He also mentioned something around cultural alignment. I think in relation to when corporates take over or they acquire other clinics as well. And that's something I can tell you that I've been very much part of as well in the due diligence team. When I evaluate clinics for acquisition, there's a lot of interaction, relationships formed, and that cultural alignment is something that we specifically look for, because the relationship's just got to be there between the local team and the wider organization as well. So I think that's a really, really important point. And then in Kathy's presentation, great organization, MedTech, what they're doing, just so, as far as I'm concerned, on the forefront really of modernization and lab management. And again, she talks about 80% of things being common in the lab and 20% not. And I think that's true actually even across national boundaries as well. That's what we're finding. We've got a project internally developed called the One Lab Project. And what we've realized is, again, 80% of what we do in the lab probably can be quite well aligned and 20% not, especially when you've got different regulatory systems, different regulatory frameworks that you're working to in different countries. So the One Lab Project probably isn't as advanced as what MedTech is doing, aspires to be something like it, I think. But when we're designing clinics, and we've relocated a number of clinics now in Europe certainly, and in Australia, we have a specification, a fit out, and equipment schedule, materials that we would use in that lab, and of course it has to be adapted to local circumstances as well. On embryologists and staffing levels, yes, that affects us in Europe and Australia as well. I kind of manage the operational side of Europe, and in the 3 countries that I oversee, Denmark, Ireland, and the UK, embryologists as well as doctors are, premium staffing and resource really so valuable to us, because there is a shortage of people out there. It becomes especially difficult in a country like Denmark, where they speak really good English there, don't get me wrong, but their primary language is Danish, and it's not widely spoken outside of Denmark. And it's a country of 5.5 million people, and they don't train many embryologists there. So when you lose an embryologist, it can be very, very destabilizing for your operation. And that's something that we have to concentrate on by making it a good place to work for people, make them want to come into work, make sure they've got a good remuneration package that goes along with that. But it's also the culture is very important. And to the Danes in particular, good work-life balance is important to them. And training centers, I think that was a question that popped up actually on the Q&A. Yeah, that's something that we're looking at ourselves as well. Invertis is developing training centers for embryologists and doctors. Certainly, it's an ambition of ours if we can achieve that. So, in summary, really great alignment with many of the things that Kathy and TJ spoke about, but I won't go on too much because there's a lot of in there. Perhaps I'll save that for the podcast later.
Thank you. Barry, your thoughts? You're muted.
Sorry about that. I appreciate you pointing that out, Rusty. I'll be looking even more foolish. So thank you. Well, again, a great presentation, Kathy. And I wanted to ask you, I think as we roll into the Q&A session now, about, Rusty mentioned, this staffing, Richard mentioned it as well, is not just the sheer lack of qualified people, but how do we get them into the lab? Training centers, when people come out of training centers, are they truly able to work, to slot into any sort of laboratory and do any role that they've purportedly been trained into? And something you brought up that I think is really important that most of us deal with when we direct largish labs is the generational factor. How do we get staff to interact favorably for the best interest of the patient when we have, we're coming from different backgrounds from a generational standpoint? So multiple questions in one, Kathy, but I wonder if you wouldn't mind sort of taking a stab at that.
Wow, that's a big question. I have not trained someone right out of college with no experience. So at my training center, we are embarking on that to fulfill our own network. So they're going into a controlled center I control. So, I have a confidence. I know what this person can do. Don't know if I could take someone out of college and spend 3 to 6 months and train them and send them to a colleague's lab and feel comfortable about that. That would be dependent on my colleagues' confidence in that, but it's certainly possible and it's greatly needed. The generational is probably all this gray here for me. I love technology, so I guess I'm a baby boomer that's not afraid of technology. My first lab director and I had a conflict with me trying to not be so dogmatic. He was very dogmatic and I was always trying to change things. So I like technology, so I do really relate to the Gen Zers, and but I struggle every day because we've invested a lot of money with MedTech in building limbs and automated programs, and it's been very difficult to get our baby boomer embryologists to use them. They don't want to use automated programs, and they're tired. Like Ellen said in her video, they're tired. So it is a job, with a lot of hand-eye coordination, and especially if you started in the early days, lots of working, no vacations, no taking time for ourselves. And so trying to mediate we paid our dues to the young kids who want a quality of life. I spend a lot of time refereeing that. And I think the next person I'm going to hire at MedTech is a psychiatrist or some type of person that can deal with that, because I spend a lot of time negotiating those waters.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, Kathy.
TJ, I have a question for you. There is a paper that is currently available online from the Journal of Assisted Reproduction Genetics. It's by Pasquale Patrizio, David Albertini, Norbert Gleicher, and Arthur Kaplan. It's on the changing world of IVF, the pros and cons of new business models in ART. The summary is they found 17 cons and only 5 pros, but I would like to point out that at least 3 of these 4 are pure academics. So, and one of the downsides that they're pointing out is there is a fear that with corporate IVF, there's going to be a reduction in the number of academic centers and therefore a loss in production of reproductive endocrinologists. How is the corporate side going to deal with it? I think actually, well, even in your network, you've got some good examples. NYU is certainly one good example, but how do you see that working?
Yeah, I think that, we're actually spending some time right now investigating about whether or not we could actually expand the number of fellowship programs within our own network. Obviously, as you point out, we have a unique partnership with NYU Langone, where we own that practice in partnership with the health system. It's been incredibly beneficial to both the health system and us. I think within a lot of these academic health centers, there's competing priorities between the cardiology department, the oncology department, and investment in the fertility clinics is something that a lot of times falls to the bottom of the list. And, we have the ability to come in and focus on that. And, I think that for us, and I know that a lot of the other platforms like us believe very strongly that, research is something we need to be doing. I commented on it earlier, publishing papers, advancing the science behind what it is we're doing, advancing the industry is to the benefit of all of us. And so I think, I do think you're going to see a reduction in the number of pure academic centers, because I think that the partnership like what we created with NYU is proving ground to the fact that you can take a scenario and create a joint venture between someone like us and an academic health system where we can pour resources directly back into the fertility program, and that fertility program is no longer competing on a budgetary perspective with an entire system that's got a lot of different competing politics and priorities amongst different specialties. And it's been a big win for us and for NYU.
That's good.
Rusty, can I comment on that too?
Of course.
Because MedTech is a business, one of the benefits for our embryologists is that we pay tuition credits. So we're sponsoring them for the EVMS Masters and the PhD degree. So that gets us involved in research and of course with our vendors. But one of the problems I see right now is the different degrees in biology, and maybe somebody from AAB can talk about this. And they're, PhDs in biology are evolving out of benchwork PhDs into more translational informatic data and that. And, so, how are we going to handle that? There's just not, I don't know at EVMS traditional biology degrees, but, biology is evolving. It's in genetics, it's in data science, and how is that going to apply to educating our future lab directors and getting them certified?
So
I think you've raised a very good point, because I don't see what I consider to be a large pool of people that I think are candidates to be stellar lab directors. I think lab directorship is something that is going to be, there are a lot of openings right now for lab directors that can't be filled. So it's another level at, both embryology, but also at the director's level as well. So I would agree with you. Kathy, I'd like to say I was very pleased that you brought up Mina Alakani and colleagues' paper on the staffing issues, because that chart shows they named 56 different procedures currently that an embryologist has to master if you're going to work in a full service IVF laboratory. In addition to doing that, then you have to do QC it and do the whole 9 yards, show proficiency, meet KPIs, et cetera. I mean, it is an absolute nightmare to be able to accomplish all of that. And if you look at the day-to-day journey of the embryologist in the clinical setting, it's just one protocol after another, one protocol after another. And my question is, and you've alluded to it, I was very happy to hear TJ allude to it, where is going to be the room for science? We have gone from, in my beginnings in this field, from a very science-based discovery type of scenario into just purely management. Where are we going to have room for science in your opinion?
Yeah, and Rusty, I'd add to that. I think that one of the things that we've all been talking about is burnout, and I think what we need to be doing is making sure that, and Kathy mentioned this earlier as well. Everyone's operating to the highest level of their license. HR should be dealing with HR issues. Rusty, you mentioned managing things. We need the people in the lab doing the science, and we need the people, we need the physicians doing what a physician can do, not what a nurse can be doing. We need a nurse doing what a nurse can do, not what an MA should be doing. And everyone operating at the highest level of their license gives them a whole lot greater degree of professional satisfaction, and removes a lot of the noise that people deal with when they say, I'm not doing my job, I'm managing people, like you just said.
I think one of the problems is that when IVF started, the pioneers were the science. They brought science to IVF, and now the embryologists we hire out of college, and they want a job. And I'm not necessarily sure they want science or even know what that means, because most people are not getting higher level degrees, being in labs. A lot of PhDs don't, have postdocs associated with it. And I think, we've sort of pushed down requirements. And I think all that training that the original set of 400 brought is not being replaced by how we're staffing our industry today.
Do you think, Kathy, as well, kind of in my experience, that call them the generation one clinicians who founded a lot of the IVF clinics, it was their, pardon the pun, it was their baby, and it was their business, and it was their venture that they set up, and they became, they did everything, and they, the science as well as the business, and they, pointed themselves to boards, and then sort of there reaches a point where they can't do anymore. They reach their capacity, and they have to professionalize management and bring other people in. And as you say, embryologists coming through want to do an embryologist job, and they may have career aspirations to move into management later on, I'm sure. But that that's what I've experienced anyway, is that the G1 clinicians who founded the original clinics are reaching the point of retirement, and they're trying to bring in professional management.
I'm sorry,
Kathy.
I find a lot of embryologists leaving the field, young embryologists, they don't like it. It's a technical job. They just do what we say. And, imagine a big clinic that did 20 retrievals, and it's day 5 from the last 20 retrievals, and they're all having PGT and they're all getting vitrified individually. That is a boring day of work. I'm sorry. But when I started, it was like, we were basically dangerous, but every day we came in and saw an embryo and went, wow. And we've taken that science and that fun out of it. It's just a repetitive technical job. And I see a lot of people going into like nursing so they can have patient contact and feel part of patient care instead of just repetitive procedures.
Yeah, I was going to say something very similar, Kathy. I think we have to also be doing is creating an environment where people want to be in this role, be in this industry, and want to be in this role. I mean, I think, and we do everything we can to try and get the embryologists connected to patients, communicating with them directly so they can see the impact of what it is they're doing in the lab and how that affects people's lives. I mean, I have my son because of professionals like those that are on this call, and I think that's really powerful. And I think we've got to make sure that we're focusing on creating the right work-life balance for people. I mean, I can't tell you the number of times we take over a lab and they basically use the lab shutdown period in December as the only time people can take leave. And I think this is a real, sort of a cliche American problem where no one takes their PTO, no one uses their maternity leave, no one uses their paternity leave. We need to be pushing people to do that so they can be the best that they are when they're in the clinic, when they're in the lab, and doing the best things for our patients and being the right cultural impact and staying in their job and not leaving. I mean, I think that's important.
I think part of the problem that we're dealing with here is that most of us didn't get into our profession when it was an industry. And I think TJ used the word industry just a couple of minutes ago. And I don't know how many medical practices or areas of medicine are considered an industry. But the kinds of things we're talking about for staffing, for qualifications, for training are more like, the steps you take and the portal into some kind of an industry. We have people coming into embryology from multiple angles. There's no formal portal or entry point for embryologists. So, as a thought, since we are more becoming more corporate, as the title of this session is, formalizing requirements, it's one of the questions that was even raised here about board certifications and certain training programs to enter the field. Would it make it more formalized, more industrial, so that it would be less people coming in and out, not knowing what they're expecting, and more able to scale? Because to address another question, there are a general lack of providers from everywhere: physicians, nurses, nurse practitioners, ultrasonographers, and embryologists. So since they all come from other fields, maybe we're talking about and provide all the infrastructure to support this industry. Get the people trained, get the titles, get the qualifications. That's not a comment and a question, but I thought it was warranted since we heard about industry today.
Well, we're getting fairly close on time, but there is one more quick question I'd like to ask both TJ and Richard, and that is, when we think about the development of networks, is there a maximum size?
I think that, look, you can focus on size. I think being big is easy. I mean, it's really, I mean, I think being the best is hard. And I think that, you have to focus on, being big for the sake of being big doesn't really provide any value. There has to be real reasons to be big. There's got to be, integrated technology. There has to be collaborations across the network. I don't think that there's still a lot of fragmentation in the space, and there's a lot of opportunity for growth. But I think, any platform that focuses on being big for the sake of being big, I think is really missing the point. It's just how I look at it. But, I don't know what Richard's thoughts are.
Yeah, I kind of, it made me think about one of Kathy's slides earlier on. I think you said, Kathy, about lab operations being related to 70% systems. I think you said that right. And it's one thing to be big, but you can be big and not very well integrated and overly complex and have all kinds of governance issues where one part of the organization doesn't talk to the other part of the organization, and you're not really leveraging the potential and the benefits of that size. So I think it's actually important to be smart first and then big if you can be big. And the way to do that really is partly through culture, but as Kathy says, it's through having a aligned system whereby the whole organization can really communicate with each other in one single language.
This is either a question or comment to TJ, what you're saying about how big is big. I think a lot of the confusion in the United States with, you know, the consolidators or disruptors or whatever these names were being called is, you know, what are they really trying to do? You know, I had that slide that I'm not a disruptor. I'm just trying to bring the best lab care through a business. And I have two goals. My goal is to, you know, improve operations and make sure everybody's doing single embryo transfer. But when you talk about others, you know, it's like they want to buy every clinic and go public, or we don't know what they're about. And I think there would be a lot less hesitation or fear if there was an identity. And TJ, I know your company does have an identity. I know Lisa very well. It's about the patient experience and that. So you do have that unique identity, but I don't think a lot of the others do. And
yeah,
so,
I think you're right, Kathy. I think, you know, if you think about the other platforms, I think a couple of them do have an identity, but, you know, you think about, you know, where Inception came from. It came from, you know, my experience as a patient, which has really been a very valuable thing because, you know, my lab director partners, some of which are part of this panel, they bring the science to the table. Our physicians bring the clinical piece, and I come at everything like a patient. And I think that presents a real opportunity for collaboration. That you know, I think that there are others that have their own identity, but I do agree that there are certainly some consolidation happening. That it's just investors consolidating for the sake of consolidating, and they're not really doing anything with it. They're not integrating anything. They're not, and you know, I will see how that turns out for them. But yeah, I think there's certainly, you make a good point.
I'm also the scientific director at IVF Florida. So not only did I get to experience COVID, but I got to experience the bankruptcy. So many of us wondered how you could spend all that money and really not give a lot and go bankrupt. So, you know, even I had that fear. And so, you know, it has to be value added. It has to be something value added, not going bankrupt.
Well, we are almost an hour and 15 minutes. We've run a little bit over, but I think for very, very good reason. So just for my part, I'd like to thank all of you that took part in this, to Kathy, to TJ, to Richard, and certainly my partner in crime, Behr. And just to remind everyone that we're very appreciative of the support that we've received for this from both for Inception, Fertility, and MedTech for Solutions. Thank you so much for that hard work. And I'd also like to just thank the other committee members of I3, Jacques Cohen and Peter Nage, and Shaista Saad-Rudin and Marianne Sabatez, and Thomas Elliott for his technical expertise. Thank you, everyone. So Barry, over to you.
Thank you, Rusty, and again to the tremendous faculty for this wonderful presentation today. I want to remind everyone that there is a new topic on March 1st with the first DMO live of the year. And the topic will be lab technologies, and it has, you know, fantastic, I would say even better, and not just, and that's referring to Rusty and I, but guest speakers, Mina Amakani, David Gardner, Marcus Messinger, top speakers. Please follow the site and look at your app, and hopefully we'll see you in the next one. Evening or wherever you are.
Well, thank you very much.